Hello, friends of YouTube. Mike here, back with Mac Truck Bookstop and Reading the World with Magda Szabo's The Door for the country of Hungary. This is a complicated novel with a simple name and a simple symbol. It is the first thing that it made me think of when I saw it at the bookstore, just reading the back, was an immediate comparison to Tove Jansson's The True Deceiver. The summaries are very similar. An exploration of the relationship between two women. One is a writer, the other is a um, kind of becomes a domestic helper for the other, and this relationship becomes kind of a fight for power over another character that's kind of in the middle, and those are all elements of this, and yet even though the summaries seem so very similar, they are very different books. But I'll get into that later. The again, as I stated, the main character of the book, and this is a main difference from The True Deceiver, is that instead of being from the perspectives of both of the two women that are at the heart of the struggle, The Door is from the perspective of the owner of the house, the writer, from one of the women. The entire book is really from one woman's perspective, who, if I recall correctly, is never actually named, and we can infer is in fact the writer herself. So it could be called a semi-autobiographical work, although there are elements of, I hate to use the term, but it's so convenient, of magical realism. I'm starting to dislike that term more and more, but it's yeah, there are some not so much magical elements, but things are exaggerated in a way that seem almost mythological, or improbable scenarios. Even Emerence, who is the domestic helper for Magda's household. Emerence, she is, as the back of the book describes, a peasant, illiterate, impassive, abrupt, and seemingly ageless. She lives alone in a house that no one else may enter, not even her closest relatives. And yet she, in a way, presents herself to Magda. Well, Magda seeks her out on a recommendation. If I remember right, how it actually all starts, that's at the way beginning of the story. But Emerence is the one who chooses whether or not she works in Magda's household. And when Magda brings home a dog, Emerence kind of takes over that dog, and the dog looks up to her as the master. Emerence's secrecy is a key element of the novel that makes it very different from Tove Jansson's The True Deceiver, where we see into the minds of both of the women in the story. And that story actually shifts in strange places between third and first person perspective, which I actually failed to talk about in that review, which is a great regret of mine, because that's one of the most unique features of the writing of the book. But anyway, this is about The Door by Magda Szabo, and I won't continue to compare it to the other book because they are truly different, as much as possible. Now, there's a few ways you can read this book, because you'll realize pretty quickly that Emerence is supposed to symbolize something. There's something not quite right or not quite human about her. She's an extremely complex character, but she doesn't fit into any box in your brain. And there are readings of this book that from the introduction, I read the introduction to the book after reading the book, and there's a thought that Emerence could symbolize the author Magda Szabo's relationship to communist Hungary, which which makes a lot of sense at certain parts. Like Hungary went through a long communist phase, is the very little history that I researched and know about it, but now has shifted out of that. And it appears that this book was written in the late 1980s, in the time where Hungary was shifting away from that. And Magda Szabo, for the first time in her life, felt free to write what she wanted. And if this is the first book where she was truly free to publish, well, not write, but publish what she wanted, it's very interesting that the whole book is dominated by a symbol of, it's like she can't even completely let go of what was in the first place holding her back. There's like a deep relationship there, and maybe there's something in this book that is treating communist nostalgia, which has affected many of the previously communist countries of Eastern Europe, as well as Russia and other countries that had long communist governments that had institutions, such as the free education and free healthcare. Of course, it was not all good, and you can debate whether it was quality or whatever, but then suddenly it changes, and you no longer have access to those things. So you could read it as something of a political allegory. Personally, I think I had a hard time accepting it at that face value. Um, Again, Emerence is a very complex character, but I am still really puzzled by the book, and I think that at the end of it, the author Magda hasn't figured it all out either. She, in this book, produces a picture of this interlocking puzzle. These two women form kind of an interlocking puzzle that you can't really pull apart. Magda feels herself as part of that puzzle, but in the end, is she unable to unlock that door? The book opens with a dream sequence where this recurring dream that Magda has, where there are paramedics outside, and she's looking through the glass and see the silhouettes of the paramedics, and she has a key, and she's trying to open this door, but she cannot open the door. And then, and this is a sense of horror. And then Emerence, now this other woman, has at her flat, has a door that she never allows anyone else to go inside or to open, except for herself. And the mysteries of what's behind that door is kind of at the heart of the novel, so I don't want to spoil that. But it's funny because even if I were to tell you all of the strange and outlandish scenes, the mysteries that are revealed about Emerence, the things that occur in the novel, where there are some scenes that like are describing, say, the eating of meat or a dinner that should not be as grotesque and terrible as they are, but the author sees in them this kind of mythological, sacrificial element, and does a really great job of bringing you into that. So there are a lot of really unsettling scenes, and there's even moments of the book that feel like a bit of psychological horror. You don't really you can't grasp what's going on exactly. The narrator has this kind of sense of powerlessness, and Emerence is just this extremely frustrating character at times, because you want to get a grasp of her, and in some respects it seems like she always comes out on top, and is always dominating others and manipulating them, and getting them to do what she wants, and yet she's providing for everybody. She's just this incredibly frustrating character to understand and to read and to interact with in the book. And that's the one where just throughout the book she's just frustrating. Magda is in many senses just this powerless observer or the character that's trying to sometimes like refute or to help, but everything that Magda does to try to relate on a human level to Emerence seems to be thwarted and frustrated, and that's part of the frustration. Emerence in many ways is cruel, and it's such a complicated relationship. Reading it once, I could go into a spoiler section about this book. Maybe I've already given some light spoilers. I hope not too much, because I do think it's a worthwhile read. I just don't have anything definitive I can say about it. I'm still left in a bit of perplexity, frustration, and confusion about this novel after reading it, and I think that was intentional, and that's the point. Um, but yeah, it just feels like that puzzle that has like two pieces that you have to turn in just the you feel like you just need to turn it in just the right way, but you feel like you've tried everything and you just can't get it to come apart. To talk about the writing, the writing style is crisp and clear at times, and then other times becomes very muddy, and sometimes it feels like things are repeated. There was a point in this novel, maybe a little bit over the halfway point, where I started feeling like there were parts that could have and should have been cut down, but then by the end of the novel, I wasn't sure, because those times when I could kind of just, okay, this is something that she's already kind of talked about before, but said in a slightly different way. Those were times where my mind could wander a bit and try to keep pondering this puzzle of what was going on. At 265 pages of, it's small text. It's not huge text. Um, it did seem a little overlong, and it felt like, especially, this is me comparing it to Tove Jansson's The True Deceiver. That book is just this finely crafted, sharply crafted, every single line has meaning, and every single line has a different aspect, and it's a short novella, while this, I feel like, extends itself into being a novel. And but remember, it's a different book. It's saying something different. Even though there are similar plot lines, I actually highly doubt that Magda Szabo would have read The True Deceiver. The True Deceiver came first, I believe. But I don't think either of these women were necessarily influenced by each other. They just found themselves kind of coincidentally exploring relationships with them. In the case of The True Deceiver, I think Tove Jansson was actually working with two aspects of herself in the book, and this one actually feels like Magda Szabo's relationship with something else, an entity outside herself. Emerence, to me, seems to be an entity outside herself. But at the same time, you could also look at Emerence as a sort of shadow self as Magda. So it's very difficult for me to decide which way to go with analyzing this book without maybe reading more of what other people have thought. So I was saying that I felt maybe it was a little bit overextended, but by the end of the novel, I actually felt that this rumination was all part of the process, and it's all part of this frustration of trying to unlock the door or the puzzle, and that this is, Magda Szabo. She's written other books, and I'm really intrigued to read. Abigail is one that sounds really interesting. By this time, she was a well-established, a famous writer in Hungary, and this was like her final book before her death, I believe. And so she was quite, older by the time she wrote this book, and well-established, and to be struggling with these sorts of things as an older woman and like later in life, gave us sort of like quiet desperation, and sort of a deeper, like a closer, you feel like you're getting close to the edge of the abyss, and you still don't have answers, and there's almost a sort of desperation about the search in this novel to find that piece of the puzzle, the key to the door. And it's like, what if that answer just never comes? What if the rest of your life you'll never have that answer? And that could be a theme, a way you can read into this as well. The secret, even once you know all the secrets and what's behind the door, have you really unlocked it? Do you really understand it? Um, there, there's another thing I can say about the writing. It's a translation, of course, from Hungarian. There were definitely times, just a few, not many. It's overall, I'd say it's a good translation by. I'll get the name of the translator here. I don't know if others have translated, but it's from Len Ricks. Um, and I'd say it's a good translation, but there were a few times where I felt like, oh, that doesn't seem like it quite translates from Hungarian. Like that's a phrase in Hungarian that's not quite completely translating to English. Just a few moments like that, but most of the book is pretty readable, and I feel, I don't know for sure, but I feel like the translator was intentionally trying to communicate with the author. So there were times where you could feel what was being translated as like, okay, the author is intentionally being clear and direct here, and then in this other part she's intentionally being muddy and confusing. And I'm gonna give the translation the benefit of the doubt and say, no, that's intentional in the writing, that the translator is trying to emulate what's going on in the Hungarian, if that makes any sense. So I don't know enough about the political situation and history of Hungary to um, know if Emerence and Magda and Emerence's relationship is about Magda's relationship to Hungary's government, old communist government, or if it's supposed to be the older generation of Hungary versus the younger generation. I don't know enough socially or culturally about them, but with communism being all tangled up in there, if Emerence were to represent the older generation, Emerence is, and you find this out very early, strictly atheist, but behaves in a very Christian manner. So that all being tangled up might be a key to that. But the other, where was I going with that? So the I don't know enough to say for sure, but what I can say for sure is what this book represents is a Hungary that defies easy narratives. So whether you approach it from communism, I can tell from this book that Hungary's experience with communism does not fit the easy narrative of communism that people present. Also, Hungary's experience of generational relations between the older and young does not fit easy narratives that you might find as generalities in the rest of the world. There are definitely some particularities about Hungary and the way people interact in this book, and the society is, and how the government is portrayed. Very things that are very particular to the country that are being communicated, that I don't have a box in my head for them. I haven't read anything similar to that in another book. I haven't seen something similar to that in another book. So that kind of thing isn't necessarily communicated in a history book, and gives me some great validation for why this project can be a great teaching experience about these countries, because they communicate some really complicated, indefinable things, and the value of those things can be debated, because some of them I may never be able to communicate, but we can't, in my opinion, communicate things until we feel them. So, with fiction and with writing, we can first feel something and then be able to think about it and to know more about it. Almost, at least in my life perspective, everything really kind of begins with feeling it and connecting to it emotionally. And that's what fiction, to me, brings to the table in a way that strict history reading never does. Strict history reading rarely is able to captivate me and make me ask questions, um, and in reality, more of history is fiction, or a fictional perspective, uh, or a fudging of the numbers, or being shown in a particular way that the author wants to. Very little history is actually 100% portrayal of what happened, and it's always selective. So this is the beauty of fiction, and a great way to experience one Hungarian woman's, their most translated author's perspective in her own country, and the complicated thoughts she had towards the end of her life that she expressed marvelously in this book, The Door. Uh, I apologize, I have very little clear to say about it, but I hope I've piqued your interest, because it's certainly a worthwhile read. And it's one that I hope to come back to and read again and understand more about. And I actually, even before that, I think I would like to check out Magda Szabo's, maybe one of her other works. I think I mentioned Abigail. So yeah, thank you for watching, and subscribing, liking, anything you do to support the project. A little bit of validation never hurts anybody, and it helps keep me motivated, though I'd be doing it regardless. So yeah, take care, and I hope you enjoyed the review.